Okay. Moshe, go ahead.
Yes, ready? Okay, this week's Sedra is Parshas Teruma, and Parshas Teruma deals with the building of the Mishkan. And the mitzvah of building the Mishkan is mentioned, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socha. And you shall make for me a mikdash, a sanctuary, I guess is the English translation, v'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell either in it or in them, among them. I will dwell among them, excuse me. I will dwell among them. So now, of course, the Mishkan was used in the Midbar as the Jewish people traversed the Midbar from Har Sinai until they entered Eretz Yisrael. And then the Mishkan continued to be used throughout after they entered Eretz Yisrael until the building of the Beis Hamikdash by Shlomo HaMelech. There were periods that the Beis Hamikdash with the Mishkan was destroyed. It was moved from place to place. There were times that the Aron wasn't there. But pretty much in the initial years of the Jewish people being in Eretz Yisrael, so the Mishkan served as the Beis Hamikdash, as the matter of fact, there is a dispute between the Rambam and the Smag. The Rambam's opinion is that the pasuk in this week's Sedra, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham, that talks about the mitzvah of building the Mishkan, as the simple pshat implies, but it also has reference to the building of the Beis Hamikdash. V'chein tasu, l'doros, for future generations. However, from the Smag, the Smag is quoted as saying that the pasuk of V'asuli mikdash has application only to the Mishkan, but psukim in the Chumash Dvarim that deal with the Jewish people having a Beis Hamikdash, a chosen place, that there is contained the mitzvah binyan Beis Hamikdash. It's true, the Rambam mentions in two different places. In Hilchos Malachim, he mentions the pasuk dealing specifically with the Beis Hamikdash. But when he talks about V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham, so there he's talking about he says he's talking about both the Beis Hamikdash as well as the Mishkan. Now, when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, the question is, when is there a mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash? And there is a very difficult statement that's mentioned in the Chinuch that everybody attacks, so to say. The Chinuch says, and I'll quote it, the Chinuch says, V'noheges mitzvah zu bizman shirov Yisrael al Masa. This mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash, of building a mikdash, applies when most of the Jewish people are on their land. V'zu min ha-mitzvah she'ena mutalas al yachad kiyim al tzibur kulai. And this is a mitzvah that is not whose responsibility, the obligation is not an obligation on an individual, but it's an obligation on the whole tzibur, on the whole community, on the whole nation. When the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt, and quickly in our days, Yiskayim mitzvah saseh, this positive commandment will be fulfilled. So the simple reading of the Chinuch seems to imply that the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash is only when the majority of the Jewish people are in Eretz Yisrael, are residing in Eretz Yisrael. Mishman Sharov Yisrael Ad Masam, or literally when most of the Jews are there. But when most of the Jews are not, and there is no mitzvah, there is no requirement, there is no halacha of building the Beis Hamikdash, of rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash. Now, and the question, everybody asks a number of questions. One question is, at the time of Bayesheni, when the Jewish people went up at the beginning of the Second Commonwealth, in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, so they built a second Beis Hamikdash. And at that time, there certainly was not a majority of the Jewish people living in Eretz Yisrael. So how could the Chinuch say that this mitzvah, this obligation, is only when Rov Yisrael, when the majority of the Jewish people are al Masam, are living in Eretz Yisrael? And all kinds of answers are given. The most famous answer, my father would repeat it a number of times, it's an answer that was given by many in previous generations, that so long as the majority of Jews had the opportunity to go up to Eretz Yisrael, and if they did not use that opportunity, so their being in Chutz La'aretz, their being in exile, cannot be used as a reason for not building the Beis Hamikdash. To a certain degree, they surrendered, or whatever you want to call it, their involvement, or the need to have them in the involvement of the building of the requirement to build the Beis Hamikdash. I don't think they would be patur from contributing towards the building of the Beis Hamikdash if their aid, their financial help, or whatever was necessary. But they don't count so long as they had the opportunity to go up. So the fact that they're in Chutz La'aretz cannot be used as a reason for the Jewish people who did go up to Eretz Yisrael not to have the opportunity and the obligation to build the Beis Hamikdash, or the opportunity to fulfill the obligation of building the Beis Hamikdash. Now, to be honest, I never said it to anybody. I'm saying it now for the first time. I always had a lot of trouble with that teretz. And from time to time, I thought about it and how to explain the chinuch. I don't know that my teretz is correct, but I'm going to try to make a suggestion that perhaps could be used to explain the chinuch. It does require, and hopefully in the future, I'll have the opportunity to look into it with greater concentration and with more time. I want to mention also that this year is in memory of Kaisara Basalta Ben Sion HaKohen. And Mrs. Borg, she was a neighbor of mine. She was her family, our close friends, her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. It's a family that were very close. And her and her husband, they lived in close proximity to my shul. I mentioned that the mitzvah of the Beis Hamikdash, V'asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'socham, the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash, and to a certain degree, this is emphasized even more by the opinion of the chinuch, is to to have the Beis Hamikdash in the midst of the Jewish people. In other words, it represents the idea of a relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whose dwelling place is the Beis Hamikdash, and the Jewish people who surround him. And every shul is a Mikdash Ma'at, is a temple in miniature, a Beis Hamikdash in miniature. And I would say that the relationship, the relationship that existed between our shul, between the Mikdash Mat, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Minayin HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bol Beis HaKnesses, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to the Beis HaKnesses, comes to the shul. The shul, if it's not the dwelling place of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the Beis HaMikdash is, it's certainly the place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a meeting with the Jewish people. And the loyalty that the Borg family had, and especially Mr. and Mrs. Borg, was expressive of that relationship. Va'asuli mikdash shachanti b'socham. It was indicative of the fact they had a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who would be Baal the Beis HaKnesses, who would constantly be coming 3 times a day to the Beis HaKnesses, as the members of the Borg family very often would be there in the shul also, together to be mispalel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, anyway, so the question is, according to the Chinuch Shita, so the question is, in the time of the Beis Sheni, when they built the Beis Sheni, in the time of Ezra, so in the time of Ezra, when they built the Beis Sheni, so the base they built the Beis Sheni. At that time, the majority of the Jews were still in Bavel. They were not in Eretz Yisrael. The majority of the Jews were in Bavel, not in Eretz Yisrael. So how are we to understand the Chinuch Shita? And not only that, we see that to a large degree, the Jewish people, even after Churban Beis Sheni, there were attempts, and there was even a situation where they got permission from the Roman government to try to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, and they were going to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. And certainly at that time, there wasn't the majority. There wasn't the majority of Jews living in Eretz Yisrael, not during Beis Sheni, and certainly not after Beis Sheni. So according to the Chinuch, how is it possible that there should be attempts to build the Beis Hamikdash when there was no mitzvah? Only the time there is a mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash is when there is a majority of Jews coming to Eretz Yisrael. Now, in order to understand this, I think we have to take notice to understand the perspective of the Beis Hamikdash. What was the Beis Hamikdash? Now, last week, instead of discussing the Sedra last week, I discussed instead of discussing the Sedra last week, I discussed about Adar. So I want to discuss the beginning of and I've discussed it in previous years. These are the ordinances, these are the laws that Moshe Rabbeinu is told to place before the Jewish people. And what is it? What is the parsha of the Torah, the end of Yisro, that precedes this command to Moshe Rabbeinu to build the Beis Hamikdash. Excuse me, to give over the laws, of Eila Mishpatim Asher Tasim Lefneihem. These are the ordinances that you should place before them to explain to them what is the parsha beforehand. It talks about building the Mizbeach, building the altar. So Rashi asked the question. Building the altar. Building the altar. That's what does that have to do with Ve'ela Hamishpatim Asher Tasim Lefneihem? Why is one almost connected to the other? So Rashi says it comes to tell you that, and there are two girsas, two texts in Rashi. One girsa is to tell us that the Beis Din Hagadol, the High Court of Israel, had to sit next to the Mizbeach, next to the altar, or near the altar. The other text, which really expresses the same idea, says that the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash, the reason it's mentioned to say that the Beis Din Hagadol had to sit in the Beis Hamikdash. The first text says it had to be next to the altar. The second text says it had to be in the Beis Hamikdash, but it's the same idea. Now, so the question is, well, why? Why is it that Sanhedrin had to sit in the Beis Hamikdash near the altar? Why in the Beis Hamikdash? Now, the Ramban asks a certain question. The Ramban, and it's both in his Hagdama here to Parshas Teruma and in his Hagdama to Chumash Shemos, he asks a question. I've mentioned this Ramban. Ramban is a very well-known Ramban. The Ramban asks the question. He says, what is the theme of Chumash Shemos? The theme of Chumash Shemos is Yetzias Mitzrayim, is the Exodus from Egypt. Even in all the English translations of the Chumash, so Shemos is not called the Book of Names, even though that's a little translation of Shemos, Eila Shemos B'nai Yisrael Habai Mitzrayim, but it's called Exodus because the theme of Chumash Shemos is the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt. But then the Ramban is troubled. If the theme of Chumash Shemos is the exodus, the Jewish people leaving Egypt, so up to and including Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, we understand. But why the second half of Chumash Shemos? I always mention this Ramban. It's a very important Ramban. Is for the Jewish the second half is about the building of the Mishkan. What is it doing in Chumash Shemos? The Ramban doesn't use these words, but I think it's implied. It seemed that it would be better off in Chumash Vayikra, that talks about the korbanos, that talks about the sacrifices, about the service that was done in the Mishkan, that was done in the Beis Hamikdash. Why is the construction of the Mishkan, the mitzvah of constructing the Mishkan, why is that in the Chumash Shemos? And as a matter of fact, we have to see. We go from Yisro suggesting judges, a judicial system to Moshe, and even that's Vayhi Mimachras. That was the day, according to Chazal, after Matan Torah. He made that suggestion. And then we go into Matan Torah, to the giving of the Torah. Then we talk about the building of the Mizbeach. Then the Eila Hamishpatim Asher Tasim Lefneihem, Moshe Rabbeinu is given a requirement to teach the Jewish people the many halachas. And then we go back to Moshe Rabbeinu going at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, going up to Har Sinai. And then we have about the construction of the Mishkan, and ultimately interwoven with it is the episode of the Egel, and again about the Mishkan. What is the connection between all of this? Oh, there are those who say that the Mishkan was given as a mitzvah because of the Egel. For whatever reason, it's for the nations of the world or for the Jewish people to see that God was interested in having a relationship with the Jewish people, even after the Egel Hazav, even after the building of the golden calf, and other answers along the same lines. However, the opinion of the Ramban is not that way. The Ramban's opinion is that the mitzvah and Parshas Teruma was given, as would seem from the order of the Psukim, and the Ramban usually has that approach. Of course, there are cases where it's not, that usually the Parshios are in chronological order. So the Ramban's opinion is that the giving of the Torah, the giving of the Torah, the building, the mitzvah to give, to the mitzvah to build the Mishkan was given to Moshe when he went up to Har Sinai, before the Egel Hazav, before the golden calf. So we have to understand what is the connection of all this. And the Ramban says that the purpose of the Mishkan was to serve as a vehicle to transfer the Kedusha of Har Sinai, to transfer the sanctity of Mount Sinai to Jerusalem. In a sense, the Jewish people had to link the Beis Hamikdash that ultimately would be built in Jerusalem with Maimed Har Sinai, with the whole Matan Torah, with the whole giving of the Torah. And as I always explain, how is it that the Jewish people who said Nasa v'nishma, who said Nasa v'nishma, immediately 40 days later stood in front of a golden calf and said, "Well, Yisrael"? How is it possible to understand that? And I mentioned always that in the Haggadah we say, "Ilu kirvanu lefnei Har Sinai." If you brought us close to Mount Sinai, v'lo nasan lanu es Torah, and you didn't give us the Torah, dayenu, that would have been great. And I always, it's not just my kasha, everybody asks the kasha. What would be the purpose in coming to Mount Sinai and not receiving the Torah? But besides receiving the Torah, there was the experience of Sinai. My father would always talk about the experience of Sinai. I mentioned, my father would say the experience of Sinai, well, he would call it the fire of Sinai. My uncle, I remember when he, at my grandmother's levaya, he said the kolos ubrakim of Sinai, the experience of Sinai, that was something that was transmitted to him through my grandmother, whereas the voice of Sinai, that was something that was transmitted to him by my grandfather. Now, but in any case, the experience of Sinai, what is the experience of Sinai? I want to suggest it's not anything different than what they're saying, but I think it's the foundation for what they're saying. The experience of Sinai was sensing the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ilu kevanu lefnei Har Sinai doesn't mean you brought us close to Mount Sinai. You brought us close to yourself. So the experience of Sinai was that way also. Now, I think that's perhaps what the Ramban is saying. In other words, how the Ramban doesn't discuss about the golden calf, but how did the Jewish people come to build a golden calf 40 days later? They couldn't perpetuate the experience of Sinai without Moshe Rabbeinu being there. Moshe Rabbeinu goes away for 40 days. He goes up on Mount Sinai for 40 days. The experience of Sinai is not there. If the experience of Sinai is not there, they did not sense the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If they don't sense the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you don't sense the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then it's very easy to sin. Shivishi Hashem lenegdi summit. Before you, without the Shivishi Hashem lenegdi summit, then it's easy to violate the halacha. Not violate just because of lack of knowledge, but violate because of attitude. And the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu was the perpetuation of Sinai, or part of the perpetuation of Sinai. So within the 40 days, they weren't able to perpetuate the experience of Sinai. So when you can't perpetuate the experience of Sinai, sometimes you can't perpetuate the Torah of Sinai. Not sometimes, always. You can't perpetuate the Torah of Sinai either. So this is the connection between, and so the purpose of the Mishkan, whether the Mishkan was made, whether the mitzvah of the Mishkan was made to after the golden calf or before the golden calf, it was to perpetuate Sinai. It was to perpetuate the experience of Sinai, not just when the Jews were in the Midbar, but even when they entered Israel, for the duration of the history. The Beis Hamikdash should never have been destroyed. The Beis Hamikdash is what gave us the ability to perpetuate Sinai, not just the Torah of Sinai, but the experience of Sinai also. The sensing the presence of God, the revelation. I always mention God is everywhere. But why is, this is the question that the Mukabalim always deal with. How is it, if God is everywhere, so why is the Beis Hamikdash different than another place? But the answer is, I don't know. So the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the ability to be more sensitive to his presence in different places. You have to, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in the street, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is in the house, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is everywhere. But let's say in a shul, we have that ability to be more sensitive to his presence. In the Beis Hamikdash, we have a greater ability to be sensitive to his presence. So the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash was to perpetuate Matan Torah, and the Mishkan. What is talk about the Dusha of Har Sinai? What was the Dusha of Har Sinai? The Dusha of Har Sinai was the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Har Sinai. The Rambam says that the Dusha of the Beis Hamikdash is a permanent Dusha. Why is it permanent? Even when the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, according to the Rambam Shita, someone who is Tameh cannot walk on the site of the Beis Hamikdash. Why can't he? Because Kitchel L'Shaita v'Kitchel L'Asavavo. It was ordained to be holy forever. And the Rambam says, why? Because Kedusha Shechina is a permanent Kedusha. What does Kedusha Shechina mean? The sanctity of the Shechina. And the Kaftav Afarach says that Eretz Yisrael also has a Kedusha Shechina. He says sometimes the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is no longer there. When the Babylonians sent the Jewish people to exile. The Kedusha of the mitzvahs of Trumos and Maasros came to an end. But the Kedusha Shechina, the presence of God, is there forever in Eretz Yisrael. So in the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, the Kedusha of the presence of the Shechina, the Kedusha in the Beis Hamikdash, that gives us the ability to be sensitive, to be extra sensitive to the presence of God, to feel closer, to Him. So this was the purpose. But the Ramban, I think the idea of the Ramban is, it's not just the Kedusha, but it's perpetuating the whole Matan Torah experience, as I've said. Now, for example, in the Kodesh Kodashim, you had the Aron with the Luchos. The Luchos, that clearly was part of Matan Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu breaking the Luchos down. A matter of fact, the Ramban has there is a machlokes. Actually, it's a machlokes in the Yerushalmi. Some saying the Bavli also. There's a discussion. The Gemara says, Luchos v'shivrei Luchos Menachem Baron. The Luchos, the second Luchos, and the Shivrei Luchos, the broken parts of the first Luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu dropped when he saw the Egel Azav, there in the Aron, there in the Ark. And there is a machlokes as to whether there was two separate arks or one ark. And the Rashi seems to be inclined towards the Shita that there were two separate arks. And he said when they went out to war, as a general rule, they did not take the ark that was in the Beis Hamikdash, that was in the Mishkan, but they took the ark that had the Shivrei Luchos. That was the Shita of Rashi, the opinion of Rashi. However, the Ramban follows the opinion mentioned in the Gemara that no, both were in the Aron. Both the Luchos and the Shivrei Luchos were in the Aron, and in one Aron. And the Ramban says, if there was two separate Aronos, if there were two separate arks, where did they keep the first ark? I don't think it's wherever they kept it, they kept it. That's not a problem. Why is the Ramban troubled about it? In other words, the Ramban is troubled about it because he saw the Shivrei Luchos also, the keeping of the Shivrei Luchos as the perpetuation of Matan Torah. So his question is, where did they keep it in the Beis Hamikdash? The second Aron, where did they keep it in the Beis Hamikdash? Where did they keep it in the Mishkan? All right, another time I'll address that problem. But the idea is the purpose of the Mishkan, the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash was to perpetuate Matan Torah. So that's the reason why. So the Aron represented, and in the Aron there was also the Sefer Torah, the whole giving over of the Torah, and of course in the Beis Hamikdash there was the Mizbeach, Moshe Rabbeinu, and this was what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe when he by the snare. He said, when you take out the Jewish people from Egypt, that's part of the process of the taking out, is the serving of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Moshe Rabbeinu makes one Mizbeach and 12 Matzevos at Har Sinai. That's the fulfillment of the command that Behotziach Lesam, but that's part of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Vayishi lochem le'elokim. So, and the Mishkan is the perpetuation, the continuation of that service. It only begins at Har Sinai. But we have to show that Har Sinai continues. And even the Shnei Kruvim, I've mentioned before, the Shnei Kruvim, that there's a contradiction. It's pointed out in the Medrash whether the Shnei Kruvim faced each other or the Shnei Kruvim faced the wall. And one of the Teretzim given, Bisman Shosim Yisrael Ritzano Shamakom, when they do the will of God. So the Shnei Kruvim, the two angelic human figures, faced each other. But when the Jewish people were not doing the will of God, so I think it's Rabbi Yochanan, he says they showed the back to each other and they faced the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, the walls of the Kodesh Kodashim. So the question is, how is it the two facing? That's a sign that the Jewish people are doing the will of God. And when they're not doing the will of God, so they face the wall of the Beis Hamikdash. Facing the wall of the Beis Hamikdash should be a sign of not doing the will of God. How we understand it. But it's not so much that they faced each other. Facing each other is the idea, because when at Maimed Har Sinai, Rashi says they were ki'ish echad b'leiv echad. They were like one person with one heart. It was indicative of the fact that the Jewish people were continuing, perpetuating the experience of Sinai, not just the experience of God's revelation at Sinai, but in the sense, the way the Jewish people were at Sinai. So, Osin Ritzonol Shalmako means we are perpetuating Matan Torah, we are perpetuating the experience of Sinai. Ain't Osin Ritzonol Shalmako. But if we're not doing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we are not perpetuating the experience of Sinai. So the Beis Hamikdash is the perpetuation. If I could add to the Ramban doesn't say it. I think that, of course, that played a big role. Beis Hamikdash primarily was dedicated to perpetuation of Har Sinai, but it's not just not just Har Sinai. I think to a certain degree, of course, mainly Har Sinai, it's the traversing of the Midbar. They kept a container of the man. Moshe was told. Moshe Rabbeinu was told to the Mata Aaron, the pans of the followers of Korach were used to cover a mizbeach of the Taurus. It was necessary. The Jewish people had to be constantly reminded that they are traversing the Midbar. And perhaps the traversing of the Midbar was part, to a certain degree, of Matan Torah. So it was the perpetuation of Matan Torah. Now, we could say, so now, but there is a question that we have to ask. So, so Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin, Moshe Kishim Bechad Koi. Moshe Rabbeinu had a din like Bezdin Haggadah, but there are two ways to understand that. One way to understand it is, I've mentioned, that Moshe Rabbeinu was in place of Bezdin Haggadah. The other way to understand it, no, is that Bezdin Haggadah was in place of Moshe. That Bezdin Haggadah was in place of Moshe. I think that's what Rashi's telling us, because the Rambam in Hilchos Mamrim, says that when Bezdin Haggadah paskins a shaila, the Jewish people are required to see it as if it was something that was given to Moshe at Har Sinai. So the Bezdin Haggadah that's in place of Moshe sits in the Beis Hamikdash that's in place of Har Sinai. So we should, Klal Yisrael, so on one hand, that Klal Yisrael should see that their psak is Torah. It was given in Har Sinai by Moshe Rabbeinu, as the Rabbi says in Hilchos Mamrim. And also, it's important for Beis Din Hagadol to understand, to reinforce that it's not some kind of some type of power that they have to decide what the law is. Their power is only in explaining what the law that was given. They, like Moshe, are bringing the Torah down from heaven. They're standing in place of Moshe at Har Sinai. It's not just the power that they have. So sometimes Rabbanim think that when they paskin a shaila, it's a power they have. They call it by all kinds of names. But it's not a power. It's teaching. It's giving over Torah. It's not even paskening. It's teaching. That's why by Be'ela Mishpatim Asher Tasim Lefnehem, that's Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the Beis Din Hagadol. But because Shulchan Aruch, you have to give it over to explain it, not just to tell them the psak. Instant psak. No, that's part of giving over Torah. And the Rambam, so this is the idea that the Beis Hamikdash is the perpetuation of Matan Torah. It's a perpetuation of the Jewish people going through the Midbar. Now, so but there is a question. The question is that seems that we have other psukim in Parsha Shoftim, when you'll have a question, bein dam ledam, bein din ledin. So where do you go? You have to go to the Beis Hamikdash, to the Beis Habchira. Why do we need the Xeris HaKasav in Mishpatim to tell us this halach? I think there are two separate dinim. Two separate halachas here. One is that Beis Din Hagadol has to sit in the Beis Hamikdash, even though it's mentioned in regard to the Mizbeach, but the Rambam says that the part of the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash was to have a place to give karbanos. In a sense, according to the Rambam, the whole Beis Hamikdash is dedicated to karbanos. So the halach is that Beis Din Hagadol had to sit in the Beis Hamikdash, in the place dedicated to karbanos. But then there's another halacha that it wasn't the halacha in Beis Hamikdash, but it was a din in Beis Din Hagadol. Beis Din Hagadol had to sit. Beis Din Hagadol had to sit in the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Din Hagadol did not have its full power if it didn't sit in the Beis Hamikdash. They had some limited power. But there are two separate halachas. One is a halacha of Beis Hamikdash. And if there's a halacha of Beis Hamikdash, and then there is a halacha in Beis Din Hagadol. So I think that's why we have two Xeris HaKasavs. We could suggest that in Parsha Shoftim, it was a halacha that Beis Din Hagadol, to have its full power, had to be in the Beis Hamikdash. And it didn't have its full strength unless it was in the Beis Hamikdash. But then there is a halacha that there's halacha that the Makom HaMizbeach, the Beis Hamikdash, needs a place for Beis Din Hagadol. Where there is a halacha of Makom, where there is a halacha of Makom of a Mizbeach. So there has to be a Makom for Beis Din Hagadol. And if there is no makom for Beis Din Hagadol, if there's no place for Beis Din Hagadol, so to a certain degree, it takes away from the essence of the Beis Hamikdash, of the Beis Habchira. The Beis Habchira was a halacha of makom, of a chosen place. So in the chosen place, there had to be a place for Beis Din Hagadol, for the High Court. Doesn't mean that the Beis Din Hagadol sat there every day. We know that to a certain degree, Beis Din Hagadol, 40 years before the Churban left, although it's brought down from time to time, they would go back into the Beis Hamikdash, into the Lishkas Hagazis. But there was a special halacha of a makom for Beis Din Hagadol. But the halacha of Beis Din Hagadol was only the halacha that it was considered that it would be a place for Beis Din Hagadol if there was a Beis Din Hagadol. But if it's impossible to have a Beis Din Hagadol at that point, you couldn't say that you built that the Beis Hamikdash, that the Lishkas Hagazis was the makom for Beis Din Hagadol. The building of the Beis Hamikdash necessitated a building of a makom for Beis Din Hagadol. Why? Because Beis Din Hagadol, that represents Moshe. That represents the Torah Shebaal Peh that was given at Har Sinai. Beis Din Hagadol was the Amud Torah Shebaal Peh. The Luchos, the Sefer Torah, they represented the Torah Shebachsav that was given at Har Sinai. However, Beis Din Hagadol represented the Torah Shebaal Peh, and that was that they represent Moshe. They are in place of Moshe Rabbeinu. And if there isn't a makom for Beis Din Hagadol, a place for Beis Din Hagadol, when you build a Beis Hamikdash, it's to a certain degree, it's not a Beis Hamikdash. Now, even after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, now there's a famous question that's asked against the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, and the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvah says that a Beis Din, that Kiddush HaChodesh al pi Hariyah could only take place when there was a Beis Din Hagadol. But when there was no Beis Din Hagadol, there was no high court, the calendar, Halacha Moshe Sinai, went into effect. And the Ramban says he doesn't understand. They left the Lishkas Hagazis 40 years before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So if there was no Beis Din Hagadol 40 years beforehand. Okay, there was no Beis Din Hagadol beforehand, and 40 years beforehand. And then after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there was certainly no Lishkas Hagazis. What kind of Beis Din Hagadol could there be? So my grandfather said, my uncle has a very beautiful piece of Torah on it, and my grandfather suggested a different answer. He said that even when there is no Beis Hamikdash, but you had people that were considered members of Beis Din Hagadol. They were considered members of Beis Din Hagadol. He even suggests with Rayas that there was and you see that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi had the din of Hanassi, even so much so that there was a discussion whether Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi would be chayav to bring a carbon and not bring a carbon that the Nesiim bring. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, so Mamela, there were members of Beis Din Hagadol afterwards. So long as there were members of Beis Din Hagadol, even though they didn't have the full power of Beis Din Hagadol, the Lishkas Hagazis, And there are different versions of this piece of Torah of my grandfather published in different places. In one place, he says there was smicha given. There was smicha given to be members of Beis Din HaGadol, even when there was no Beis Hamikdash. That continued. Obviously, that came to an end. So in other words, you had the regular smicha that was given, and you had a special smicha that was given to be a member of Beis Din HaGadol. And so long as this smicha continued of being a member of to be a member of Beis Din HaGadol, just like Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi had the status of being a Nasi of Beis Din HaGadol when there was no Beis Din HaGadol functioning in the Lishkas HaGazis. So people receive special smicha to be members of Beis Din, HaGadol, even when there was no Beis Din HaGadol functioning in the Lishkas HaGazis. So the Kiddush HaChodesh could continue until the time of the smicha ended, because to a certain degree, they would be able to form. They might not have had the power that they had in the Lishkas HaGazis, but they could form a Beis Din HaGadol, and certainly when the Beis Hamikdash would be rebuilt, they could form a Beis Din HaGadol. I think I want to suggest, to answer the chinuch, that perhaps in Bayis Sheni, when they built Bayis Sheni, there was no problem. In other words, you need, when you build the Beis Hamikdash, you have to build a place for Beis Din HaGadol. Beis Din HaGadol, as the Beis Hamikdash, as the perpetuation of Maimon Har Sinai, needs Moshe Rabbeinu there. It needs the giving of the Torah Shabbal Peh, the giving of the Torah Shabbal Peh, that Moshe Rabbeinu, the position that Moshe Rabbeinu fulfilled. But it could only be a makom for a base. There could only be a makom. You could be building a makom for Beis Din HaGadol only when you could appoint a Beis Din HaGadol. But if the smicha for the members of Beis Din HaGadol came to an end, so you can no longer appoint a Beis Din HaGadol. If you could no longer appoint a Beis Din HaGadol, then there's something lacking in building a mikdash on the Makom HaMikdash, because the Makom HaMikdash needs a Makom, a place for Beis Din HaGadol, So now it's true. The Rambam says if all the Chachamim of Eretz Yisrael come together, they could possibly reinstitute the original smicha. But I think I heard that the Reb Simcha Zelig Rieger, who was the Dayan of Brisk, he said, but not Beis Din HaGadol. They could reinstitute the smicha. You could have a Beis Din of Gimel. I don't know whether Chav Gimel, maybe even Chav Gimel. But to sit in Beis Din HaGadol, that they couldn't reinstitute. The Ma'aribei Rav could not reinstitute a Beis Din HaGadol. This many years ago, there were those who toyed with the idea of making a Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael. And at that time, the Brisker Rav came out against them. And there were people who suggested all kinds of foolish things. And there were people who recognized that even the suggestion represented a threat to Torah. So according to what my memory, what Reb Simcha Zelig said, even according to the Ma'aribei Rav, based on the Rambam, that smicha could be reintroduced, but not to sit in Beis Din HaGadol. In other words, when it comes to Beis Din HaGadol, it could be that you need that you need Rov Klal Yisrael there. Why do you need Rov Klal Yisrael? There could be many reasons for it. First of all, Beis Din Hagadol represents Klal Yisrael. It represents Klal Yisrael. Secondly, there are halachas that are dependent upon Rov Klal Yisrael being in Eretz Yisrael. Let's say the Yovel, which is connected directly with Beis Din Hagadol, because Beis Din Hagadol is the one who proclaims the Yovel years. So Reb Chaim says that the Beis Din could count the Yovel years for the Shemitah years when there was a Beis Din Hagadol in the Beis Hamikdash, but the Yovel itself, the halachas of the Yovel didn't take effect. So it's only through the proclamation of Beis Din Hagadol. So in order for the Yovel year declared by Beis Din Hagadol to have full effect, you need Rov Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael. So, and there might be other reasons also. That's how we can answer the chinuch. In other words, in the time of Beis Sheni, there were members of Beis Din Hagadol. They didn't have to make Beis Din Hagadol from scratch. And even after Churban Beis Sheni, all the way till the time of Abaye and Rava, there were people who were appointed who received a special smicha, as my grandfather said, to sit to be able to be members of Beis Din Hagadol. So they could have tried to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash during those years if they had the permission from the Roman government or whoever was in charge. But today, all smicha came to an end. The idea of Beis Din Hagadol for the contemporary time can't be. You could take all the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael together with all those who think that they are Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael, and you can't make a Beis Din Hagadol. We'll only be able to make a Beis Din Hagadol. We'll only be able to make a Beis Din Hagadol when all the chinuch held, only when Rov Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. And when we're able to make a Beis Din Hagadol, that's when we'll be able to make a place in the Beis Hamikdash for Beis Din Hagadol. And the makom, the place for Beis Din Hagadol to sit in the Beis Hamikdash is a prerequisite for the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash. This is how we could explain the shita of the chinuch. And to a certain degree, we could say that this is the idea. We could say, in other words, it's important for us, for the Beis Hamikdash, to be recognized as the place for all Klal Yisrael to feel close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in a sense to re-experience the Matan Torah of being Ke'ish Echad, B'leiv Echad, where all Klal Yisrael was together, and as the Kruvim, the Pneihem Ish Alachim. We have Jews all over the world, and the Jews in Eretz Yisrael sometimes act on behalf of the Jews of Chutz La'aretz. But halachically, to establish Beis Din Hagadol, to make from scratch, to make a new Beis Din Hagadol, where the smicha to be members of Beis Din Hagadol came to an end, there you need all Klal Yisrael, because in a sense that's the perpetuation of Matan Torah. All Klal Yisrael received the Torah, and so it's necessary for the establishment of the Beis Din Hagadol, in order to restart the Beis Din Hagadol, that all Klal Yisrael, or Rov Klal Yisrael, will be in Eretz Yisrael. Okay.
So Moshe, you would be saying that, for example, during the time of the Romans, after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash,
they still could do it, because there were people that received smicha to be members of Beis HaMikdash.
But you're saying once it's stopped, according to what the chinuch is saying,
Once it stopped,
stops to restart,
right.
you need a majority.
That's right.
Oh, and,
That's right.
and therefore, at the right.
That's right.
Why didn't Klal Yisrael attempt to build a third Beis Hamikdash if the Romans?
They tried, but the Roman government intervened.
Got it.
And it would have been, and the same logic. So you're saying building the Beis Hamikdash at that point would have been okay.
That would have been okay, yes.
Because you still had smicha, so you could create
That's right.
lodgings for the Beis.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, there are some achronim. I think the Minchas Chinuch. There's some achronim that say that if we would get permission, but they don't. They disagree with the Chinuch. That if the government would give permission, so technically. You would be able to build the Beis Hamikdash today. I'm sure there are institutions making money, drawing up plans like that. There were some big Talmidei Chachamim that even suggested it. Okay, what can I say? But clearly, according to the Chinuch, it could not have been done. Rav Goren, who was a great Talmud Chacham, he had blueprints for the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. But clearly, according to the Chinuch, that couldn't be done.
Okay, we have one question here.
Yeah.
Shouldn't our goal then be to have the majority of Jews living in Eretz Yisrael in order to reestablish the Beis HaMikdash, in order to build or bring?
I would say all of that is true, but our goal should be to get a majority of Jewish people to live in Eretz Yisrael, because the Jewish people should live in Eretz Yisrael.
You know, Moshe, there are those who say that today there is a majority of Jews living in Eretz Yisrael, that it outnumbers the Jews in Chutz La'aretz.
I can't tell you that it might, first of all, I don't know. First of all, you have to determine who's Jewish and who's not Jewish. And I don't know the statistics. I can't, I have trouble believing it. You have to realize there are many people that are Jewish that don't even know that they are Jewish. The statistics are only those who declare themselves to be Jewish. And with those statistics, there are many that are not Jewish. And on the other hand, there are many Jews in Chutz La'aretz who don't even know that they are Jewish. So it's kind of hard to evaluate.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Nothing on my end, so
Okay.
Let's leave it there. I'm gonna shut off the recording.
Okay.